webinar series on which we do every Thursday. It's in the digital development and data-driven agriculture series. I think it's got, we are really hosting a number of thought leaders, innovators, also discussing concurrent ideas which are being discussed in the area of data-driven digital agriculture. And so a warm welcome to all of you for coming, and a special warm welcome to all the people who have joined from outside the bank. So today's series, we are talking about co-creating an industry standard for sharing agriculture data globally. And we have an interesting sort of discussion and a presentation today. It features Digital Green, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and Microsoft. And I'll quickly introduce the speakers. And we also have two discussants also who will really, lead to the discussion on the topic. Just some announcements before I introduce the speakers. This series is available on the World Bank's Open Learning Campus, and you can find the link at the bottom of the announcement. So all the presentations and all the previous recordings are also available at that link. And please feel free to use this resource, which is being offered to all our clients and partners globally through the Open Learning Campus. Also, this particular webinar, the way we run is that people ask questions while the presentations are going on through the chat box. And you can keep on asking the questions as things are going on, and we will curate all these questions and convert them into the discussions. They will be curated by us, and then we will raise them to the panelists the way the questions come in. And all the presentations recorded and curated chat will be available to you, all the people who have registered, and it will be also on the Open Learning Campus. Let me introduce now today's panelists on the topic. Before that, I would like to say that this topic is of great interest to us. As we have started working on the whole data ecosystem, which surrounds the innovation ecosystem around agriculture and agtech, we find that a lot of the characteristics are that data is very scattered, dispersed. A lot of agencies are spending 60 to 70% time in collecting data, then analyzing it, and then developing products and innovations. But because we don't have any standard, industry-wide standard, either by the technology companies or the agribusiness companies or the governments, we have a lot of data which gets collected and then is not available to everyone else to really work on products and services. So the rate of development of products and services and the ecosystem which needs to come in as a result of this data is still very low in intensity and low in quality. Although we are seeing a lot of very innovative products coming in and development of the whole startup ecosystem and the innovation ecosystem around that, but still it has not nowhere around what the requirement is and what the full potential is. And you can clearly see parallel to the other sectors like fintech, health, education. And I think we are, I feel at this stage about 8 to 10 years behind other industries in this area. So this is a very important topic for us, for World Bank, but also for all the other partners here. And we would like to develop a collaborative program as a result of it with all the partners so that this becomes a priority as we go forward. Let me introduce now our panelists today. And first, Rikin Gandhi, who is co-founder and executive director of Digital Green. Rikin is not a stranger to us. He has worked with us, the World Bank programs, for at least 8 to 9 years, and I had really the privilege of working with him when he started his work in India, particularly at that stage. Rikin is a aeronautical space engineer from MIT and also from Carnegie Mellon. the computer science, and he's really who intersects technology and development in a very unique way. And I think Ricken will talk today about the FarmStack solution which they are developing today. We have also Lynn Nees, who is the chief technologist on IoT enterprise group at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. He's an HPE fellow and chief technologist for HPE's Point Next IoT practice. And he is responsible for driving innovation technology with partners of HP and is also developing the Edgeline business and many other things, which I think he will talk about. And very warm welcome to Lynn Nees today. And then we have Ranveer Chandra. Ranveer Chandra is the chief scientist at Microsoft Azure Global, and he has led many of the innovations across industry verticals at Microsoft Azure, and also developed a number of other products, research products, which like Xbox and Azure and other Visual Studio, which have really been the mainstream products of Microsoft as they have gone. He really initiated this FarmBeats project, which he has talked about in an earlier webinar in this series. And he really has developed this FarmBeats innovation, and which is really looking at how to bring all the Azure products and platform onto agriculture. And again, a very, very distinguished chief scientist at Microsoft Azure, but also works across many global platforms. Very warm welcome to you, Ranveer. And I'll also bring in the two discussants. I'm very glad to have Stuart Collis, who is on leave, and he's joining us early morning on leave. He's a senior program officer right now on Digital Agriculture Solutions and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he leads the foundation's work in a number of innovations on digital data and others. And we partner with them on many of the multi-agency kind of innovations and things there. He's also an innovator, and he founded Aware, a benefits corporation which focused on agriculture intelligence, information, and insights, and worked on at CGIAR and Texas A&M University on crop simulation, agroclimate modeling, and all software development. And he works on the theme of smart farming solutions and digital farmer services at Gates Foundation, and he will share his views on this topic also today. And we have our own Laura Ralston. She's senior economist with Agriculture Food Global Practice, and she has now started a new work program with us on how we can use data access and utilization for agri-food systems, and create a data platforms which we can invest in the World Bank as a public good. And she has a lot of field experience, and she's also PhD from MIT, and really again intersects the whole field of data science and development in a very, very unique kind of way. And Laura will be the discussant and also present some of the World Bank's ideas on how we want to work on this agenda. Without further ado, today's discussion is structured in a way that Ricken will make a short presentation, and then he will moderate a discussion between the three panelists, Ranveer, Lynn, and Ricken. And then we will open up for discussions to Stuart Collis and Laura Ralston, and then we will open for Q&A. So I will urge you to start putting your ideas and questions into the chat box from the beginning, so that we are able to harvest a rich set of questions there. Please mute your microphones, and please do not run your video while the things are going on, so that we can preserve bandwidth and the quality of the conversation is there. But keep your microphones muted. And over to now to Ricken for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. For this opportunity to connect with this diverse ecosystem of folks who are in this journey of co-creation that we are very much keen to kickstart today with all of you. And this is very much meant to be a participatory co-development exercise. Myself, Rick and Gandhi from Digital Green, I'm going to present to you today some of the preliminary work that we have made with respect to designing FarmStack. And as Parmesh mentioned, I'll be inviting Lynn Neese from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Ranveer Chandra from Microsoft to join me in a conversation on how the various pieces of work that we're developing when it comes to designing agricultural data exchange, how we could see these pieces coming together in a complementary fashion. But we would be very keen to hear from all of you about various technical pieces of technical architecture that you might be creating or that you have ideas about, as well as potential use cases. And at the end of this webinar, we really hope that we can have a call to action for folks who are interested to either join us in a community of practice around developing the technical architecture of what we share today, or if you think that what we're presenting today could be applicable in your work and present an opportunity for co-developing a use case, we'd be also very excited to hear from you about that. So thank you again for this platform. And I'll just jump straight in. At Digital Green, for the last 14 years, we've been focused on largely improving the efficiency of large-scale agricultural extension systems. And we have primarily ended up doing that with a number of great NGOs across different parts of South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as with various government ministries of rural development here in India, ministries of agriculture, for instance, in Ethiopia, many of which have received financing from the World Bank and others, and where we have introduced them to using videos that are produced by farmers and for farmers to improve the efficiency of their existing agricultural extension programs, essentially to take a one-to-one field demonstration or farmer field school type of activity, capture that on video, feature local individuals sharing their testimonials or demonstrating practices, and then having these videos screened by village-level extension agents who screen these videos amongst women's self-help groups or farmer groups of various kinds every 2 weeks in sync with the cropping season, and where they collect data and feedback about who watched what video, what questions they asked, and what practices farmers adopted or didn't adopt afterwards to inform the production and distribution of the next set of content. This approach has been scaled largely as a result of our partners, especially these government partners on the ground, to more than 2 million farmers. And as we've done so, we've ended up collecting a lot of data about these individual farmers, about which videos they watched, what questions or feedback they expressed when they watched these videos, and what practices they adopted or didn't adopt afterwards. At the same time, we realized that there's many more organizations besides Digital Green that are collecting data about farmers, and many more organizations than just the government extension systems that we partner with. The whole ecosystem has really exploded, especially in markets like India, where there are more than 450 agricultural technology startups that have received more than $250 million worth of funding in just the last 1 year alone, not to mention the vibrant ecosystem of civil society organizations, other government departments, and the like that also collect data. In our journey at Digital Green, we started back in 2006 setting up our own management information system to collect this farmer level data for each of those individual farmers, those 2 million farmers, about their journeys across watching videos, asking questions, adopting practices, and then repeating this cycle every 2 weeks. And over time, many of our government and NGO partners established their own management information systems, and we ended up integrating our data management systems with theirs. But with the proliferation of such a large ecosystem of stakeholders, public, private, civil society, we, together with a number of our partners, both donors, government, and civil society, came to this realization that what's really required at this point is to invest in a shared data ecosystem so that we can maximize the complementarity across our respective efforts and identify ways that we can create win-win applications across our respective efforts that maximize impact for farmers and accomplish our own individual organizational missions. And so where it begins for us is by starting with these organizations who are in this agricultural development space. Each of us collects different types of data. Some of it might be individual farmer-related profiles, such as what is the name of the farmer, in which village, with what farm perimeter, GPS locations, growing what set of crops, or what set of livestock might they be husbanding. Other types of data might pertain to financial transactions, about credit histories that microfinance institutions might have with an individual farmer. Still others might be Internet of Things devices that collect data at a farmer or field level about soil conditions or weather parameters or the like. And each of these data sets, of course, have different types of requirements associated with them. Some of them have high needs for privacy or even national security implications. Others might be proprietary and might involve competitive aspects of a commercial business that might be willing to share some data, but not others to be able to accomplish a win-win type of objective. The second step is that this data also is complemented with the data that comes from the farmers themselves, right? About the feedback, about their interactions with the service. In our case, it is the data about farmers watching these videos and their participation during those video screenings, their questions during them, and their practices that they adopt afterwards. In other cases, this could be other data. For instance, the purchasing pattern of inputs like seeds and fertilizers, or the produce that farmers are selling to an off-taker, the volume and price that these farmers realize. And that combination then helps to inform and refine the solutions that we, as a community of like-minded organizations serving the same communities of farmers, can bring together to improve and iterate our solutions to make a bigger impact. But this has to be juxtaposed with the next slide, with thinking about at the farmer level, how do we bring these systems level interventions of sharing data to not just extract data from farmers, but actually enable farmers to gain greater control over their own data and get access to more targeted information or more targeted services, and have mechanisms for them to share their own voice in the process about what services, what pieces of information are working for them, or and what is not. Next slide. And so what we're attempting to build is a public digital infrastructure to enable the sharing of data across the food and agricultural system. Again, it's such a vast variety of organizations and individuals that operate in this space. There's those who are working in extension on production issues, others that are on the market access side, still others on the finance or insurance areas, and many in between. And the idea is to create an interoperable standard that allows us to have control over our own data as data owners, but also to engage the communities themselves so that they, over time, can see the value of this new asset, just like the produce that they harvest, that they are generating, that they can monetize and benefit from for their own decision-making and productivity interests. Next slide. when we embarked on this journey, we spoke to a whole spectrum of organizations, specifically in 2 geographies initially. We focused on India and on Ethiopia, and we talked to governments, non-governmental organizations, research organizations, the private sector, and we spoke to them about would they find value in having such a data exchange. And across the board, everyone said yes. We see clear value for being able to share data with each other. However, they also shared that there's real hindering factors to do so. And the first and foremost is trust. Just like you'd find in any governance or partnership type of network, the biggest issue that people see is if I share my data with you, how do I get credit for it? How do I make sure that I don't lose my competitive edge? How do I make sure that my farmers that I'm collecting data about aren't exploited? And so organizations really wanted to make sure that no third party, including Digital Green, had visibility over the data that they might want to share with an organization or an individual of their own choice. And they wanted to make sure that any transfer of their data would be done securely in a way that they could put particular limits around how that data that they might share perhaps could be constrained to only being available for a particular duration of time, or maybe only being used for a particular purpose. Let's say we could share at Digital Green our data about the locations and phone numbers of individual farmers to an IVR service, but only for the purpose of that IVR service to engage those same farmers that we're working with to reinforce the videos that these farmers are watching. So how can we constrain or define these usage policies over the data to ensure that it is used for the intended purpose? And finally, how do we discover all of this data that various organizations are having, but that today live in so many fragmented silos, and where oftentimes there are questions about the reliability of the data, the frequency of updation, the resolution of the data? How do we also connect our data, which might be referencing village locations by village names, to another data source like a soil map that might be referencing soil conditions based on latitude, longitude, GPS locations? So how do we develop that transformation or interpretation layer to connect these 2 disparate data sets together? So these were the big requirements that we heard from the stakeholders that we worked with, as well as others that we were keen to engage in developing this back-end data exchange. Next slide. And there, what we also came to realize was that there's a lot of actors who are already in this space. So FarmStack, of course, is not entering into a space where data services don't already exist. There's a number of data transformation and data discovery services that a number of groups have already created. And we're going to hear about from Lynn and Ranveer in just a little bit about some of the work that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Microsoft have done and what we see coming together with what we are doing with FarmStack. And many of these things include creating global public goods of data. For instance, weather data, ontologies of enabling data exchange to take place, soil data, market price data. So much data exists and is being enabled by a lot of this work that many organizations are doing. But one piece of the puzzle that we found that was somewhere where FarmStack could add value was specifically with respect to this data transfer piece, wherein organizations wanted to have a peer-to-peer way of sharing their data with one another, not to share their data into a global, centralized repository, but to be able to share their data directly with whoever they might choose, with whatever usage policies that they might want to define. to have the flexibility to determine whether they want to host their data on a local server in country because of some policy requirements of data localization, or that they might be hosting their data on a cloud service, and still be able to interact between two or more parties to share data with one another to, again, get this value addition of two or more data sets coming together for a particular purpose. And that is so that those two data sets coming together are combined so that they have a greater value than the sum of their individual parts. And that's what these use cases of bringing together data can enable. And I'll share with you a video that will bring this to life in just a moment. Next slide. And this peer-to-peer architecture essentially allows, as I mentioned, an organization, for instance, A, to define what are its usage policies. What duration am I willing to give my data to a organization B, with what types of restrictions that perhaps it can only be used for a particular purpose, and perhaps that it can't be published to the public internet, but can only be used within the confines of my use case that I've defined with both between organization A and organization B. And then that there is a discovery service for organizations to identify what is available in the both global community of organizations like the FAO, the CGIAR, Big Data in Agriculture Initiative, and others that one could tap, but also in the local ecosystem within a country where there's a multitude of stakeholders who, again, collect data of various kinds, and where these use cases oftentimes are taking place at a very, very local level. Next slide. And that's where we envision an architecture wherein there are these governing groups at a country level who help to define what are those data models and annotation services that can bring this data together. What are those data discovery and data transformation services that bring together the global public good data sets like weather and soil and market types of information together with the local data of markets and extension and input dealers and the like. And then have these usage policies for enabling that data exchange across public, private, civil society organizations, and where ultimately the vision is that both the data owners as well as those farmers who also are data owners in their own right have control over their data with respect to how they can have a unified view across their own data so that they can make smarter decisions for themselves. And number two, that they can be the deciders of who they share their data with a digital signature of whoever created that data with them, so that it was known that this data was reliable and trustworthy for others who might receive it. So with that, next slide, or video rather. With that, I'd like to show a short video for just 3 minutes to make this real. What I shared was a bunch of abstract concepts of data architecture and technical concepts that I understand could be conceptual in some ways. But to make it real for you, want to share a real example for an individual farmer in India about the before and afters journey for her, before FarmStack and after FarmStack. And then after that, we'll then segue into our conversation with Lynn, Ranveer, and myself.
Savita is a chili farmer from Bihar in India who is part of a farmer-producer organization that meets regularly to watch Digital Green's videos on good agronomic practices. she has been struggling to find buyers and to sell her crop at a good price. To sell her crop, she needs information on potential buyers and what they demand. But proprietary data on demand rests with buyers themselves, who either don't know how or are unwilling to share it without data protections. Let's call this Node 1. Buyers need information on farmers like Savita and her chili supply. But Savita lists her production and harvest plans with a local producer organization, which does not have easy ways to share this personally identified data without compromising privacy. Let's call this Node 2. We need an easy and secure way to exchange data across these nodes. Let's explore one example of a use case for FarmStack. Imagine a digital marketplace called Loop that uses WhatsApp chatbots to connect farmers with buyers. Loop requests supply and demand data from both the nodes via FarmStack. Producer organizations and buyers each define their own usage policies. The producer organization requires privacy and anonymization for farmers, and buyers require that their proprietary data is not publicly shared on the internet. Loop can use this data only after the producer organization and buyers each provide consent. In this way, Loop gets access to the location, the quantity, and the quality of the chilies Savita wants to sell, along with photos and videos of her crop to build an online catalog. At the same time, Loop also gets data on the quality and quantity of chili that buyers demand. Just like Loop, any marketplace service or a big box aggregator or retailer could request data directly from farmers or buyers in the same way via FarmStack's peer-to-peer architecture without needing to go through Digital Green or any third-party organization. Savita can choose Loop or any other service she prefers and sell her chilies easily at the highest price, while buyers get the freshest produce directly from farmers. Just as she shares her supply data, Savita can also share other data, from transaction activity with banks for better credit to production plans with researchers for better extension videos. In this way, we can keep serving the need of all rural communities and together build a resilient future.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite Ranveer and Lynn, if you could share your video if possible, to join in a conversation on the various pieces of work that each of our respective groups are working in, and again, would love to invite others to join us again on either the technical architecture side or on potential use cases that you think might be relevant for what we're sharing today. But maybe I'll start by asking Lynn, one of the challenges for all of what we're talking about data exchange is both for organizations to have the incentive to think that sharing is even valuable. And then number two, that it's often hard for organizations to find data that they can trust and to know what its resolution and reliability is. Would you be able to share a bit about the work that Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is doing and how it sort of links to our overall vision for building this global industry standard for agricultural data sharing?
You bet. Thanks, Richard. So, the problems that you've been addressing, digital green, are not at all unique to agriculture. And in fact, we have many vertical industries where we've seen the same requirement emerge. And so part of my involvement, I'll get back to what we're doing in this specific area, part of my involvement has been as a consultant to companies in various operational contexts, companies who are manufacturers, logistics companies, healthcare companies, agricultural suppliers, for example. There's an emerging need for the data science that is now becoming very important to all of these endeavors to find better ways of taking labor out of the system for using data, what you call discovery services associated with FarmStack. And so I've been involved in working with several industrial Internet of Things companies, vendors, to derive a discovery services capability. And then as part of HP Enterprises Tech Impact 2030 program, which we founded with the World Economic Forum, focused on food systems and food security, and hence why we know you here in Digital Green and the World Bank. The applicability here is extremely broad, and a lot of the focus I've been involved in has been driving that discovery services side of this. So, for example, how do we remove the work people have to do to find a particular expert, a niche expert on some protocol or some data storage standard, or has access to a particular obscure source of data, in order to bring that data to bear on critical analytics and decision making? When I think about the incentives for this, very much, many industries have the same incentivization and privacy demands that we're talking about here for the farmers. And when I see that the example of Luke that you just showed, that to me is a very, very straightforward incentive for farmers for both supply and demand side in this particular agriculture context. Clearly, the incentivization, or the appropriate adjective is here, for operators is to get their own data. What is it I do as an operation? In agriculture, what is the state of my operation, my field, my soil, my weather conditions? How does it affect my yield? How does it affect my business? How does it affect my everyday, assignment planning? And many operators would love it and covet to have that data. And those who can enable them to have that data frequently can't see a way to profitably provide them with the data that they would want while protecting the data that they, as we'll say, vendors of assets use for these activities, can use for their own commercial gain. So the incentives need to be there on the commercialization side, and we see providing operators with data about their own operations becomes a huge incentive, but it requires the privacy that you've been talking about, peer-to-peer connectors, the ability to consent to who can see what data.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. I guess, Ranveer, you've obviously worked on FarmBeats in both India as well as in the US context. Could you share, how do you see, what are the incentives or the use cases that you've actually done yourself that make people see value in sharing data in its first place, and what kind of tools, many of which that you've been involved in developing, that could really enable people to get the insights that they need to make better decisions, whether an organization or at an individual farmer level?
Yeah, hi, Rikin, and hello, everyone. It's great to be back, to be talking to all of you. So as I mentioned in my previous talk, Rikin, that we at Microsoft believe in a future of agriculture that is data-driven. That is, what we mean is that the decision that a grower takes is taken based on data and data-driven insights. The decision that a policymaker takes should also be driven from data from the farm, from the supply chain. Just to give a few examples, with the data of a farmer can plant the right crops. They know what to plant in the farm based on the predicted microweather. Again, these are all examples of how data and artificial intelligence could play a role in helping a grower be more productive. The grower can plant the right seeds at the right time. They can put water at the right time. They can apply the right inputs. And all of these together can help a grower be more productive. It can help them save costs. It can help them practice regenerative farming. But the key question in all of this is, how do you get data from the farm? One of the problems that we have been focused on at Microsoft is, how do you get this data? How do you get this data from diverse sources? And then how do you apply artificial intelligence on top of that to turn that data into insights? and some of the problems with respect to farm connectivity, with respect to AI, are some of the problems that we are addressing as part of FarmBeats. That's how do you get data from satellites, from sensors, from drones, from all of these different diverse data streams, combine them using AI so that it's not just data, but it's actionable intelligence. And the way we do that is in the Azure FarmBeats platform, which we announced in public preview last year. We work with partners, with, say, for example, data partners, sensor partners, drone partners, who bring in data for a farm so that in one place in the cloud, you have all the data. And then we combine that, we bridge that to AI so that you can then, data scientists can come and start writing AI models on top. And over the last few months, we've created several partnerships with Land O'Lakes, with PepsiCo, with USDA, with Cyro, and many other companies, where we are helping bring the agricultural knowledge that exists in these enterprises with all these technology innovations that are happening in the tech sector, so that we can bring the benefits of data-driven agriculture to the growers and people in the entire food chain. However, the one point which is coming to today's discussion is that, yeah, we've only scratched the surface with respect to what you can do with AI with the current approach. That is, we're just looking at a single farm and how do you get all of this data from a single farm. I think the true benefit would come if to the exact point you mentioned, Rikin, is that you're not just getting data from one farm, but you can start sharing data across farms, across growers, across producers. And once you start doing that, you could see multiple benefits, like the one you talked about with market linkages. Taking it a step further, one of the reasons artificial intelligence, the application of AI, is limited in agriculture is because of the lack of good and complete data. That is, data right now exists in silos. And so the AI models are enabled to pick these dependencies that exist across the data. And so the benefits of AI that we are seeing is still quite limited in agriculture. And that's why I think if we can come up with a way to, like what you're talking with FarmStack, to enable different entities, different organizations to share data, it helps make all the entities more efficient. In addition to that, it also helps unlock these new, better AI models that can bring the benefits of artificial intelligence to agriculture. So that's the way we think of what can be enabled with data and data sharing. But that said, even though the benefits are known, it's really challenging to share and integrate all these diverse data sets, right? Especially if you don't have a centralized entity that is hosting all of that data. So I wanted to pose this question back to you, Rikin, and to Lynn, as to how would you address this problem? That is, if you don't have just one centralized entity, or do you have to trust that entity? What are your thoughts on that problem?
Yeah, no, I appreciate your thoughts, Ranveer. The way that we're approaching it with FarmStack is to think of it in a nuanced way. There may be some data sets that are global public goods that the government and philanthropy invest in, soil, weather, such things that could be more centralized repositories of data. But then there's a whole gamut of diverse data sets that have high degrees of fragmentation, like market data, extension data, input data, which organizations, out of their own individual sensitivities and proprietary interests, are not going to be okay with just publishing that into one central repository of data. And so that's where, with FarmStack, we've emphasized this more decentralized architecture for data transfer, which doesn't, of course, prohibit the fact that if somebody did end up centralizing a bunch of data together, power to them, it can still be shared in and outbound via FarmStack. To give an example, just like with what you just shared on FarmBeats, an organization might use FarmBeats for bringing together, let's say, soil, weather, and some cropping practice information that the extension service might have, right? And we at Digital Green might have access to that very low level, at a farmer sort of level, data set. to bring that together to create a business intelligence function to help a farmer make a decision, let's say like sow timing or harvest timing kind of decision. FarmBeats might be a place where these disparate data sources in a peer-to-peer way could be exchanged and then integrated and analyzed by FarmBeats. And then similarly, the processed version of that data could then also be transferred to different service providers. It could be a WhatsApp chatbot. It could be just an asynchronous extension agent who somehow gets that data told to them, and they go and tell the farmer that this might be something that you should consider in terms of sow or planting time. And so, yeah, what the idea with FarmStack is to allow for that peer-to-peer exchange with different codification of usage policies as per the requirements of the source or the consuming data users.
Yeah, I think it's a decentralized. I agree with that, Ricky. I think the concept that there's like big, huge centralized catalogs for discovery services is itself probably not the most efficacious way to proceed. I think it is more of a decentralized approach. I don't need to trust a lot of people. I just need to trust a few people, and they can take my data and somehow I can make it impossible for them to share things I don't want them to share with others who I might not trust like I trust them. But I think of it as a network, a decentralized network of catalogs and discovery capabilities, not unlike links in web pages as we see those today, but with a trust model that obviously must be more exotic to support the requirements of individuals. Sorry, Ricky, I know you're about to speak.
No, that makes sense. And I guess maybe to each of you, since what we're hoping for is to kind of think about if there is an architecture that could create a global standard, and Microsoft and Hewlett Packard Enterprise have had experience in both sort of the global South as well as the global North. And in some ways, some of these things that we're talking about data protections and even artificial intelligence kind of like use cases and IoT sort of device-based data capture might be more relevant in the global North, right? But if you could share a little bit about your experience also for the global South and how you think there might be some shared elements to this backend structure that might be relevant for both contexts. Would you be able to perhaps talk about that? Maybe Ranveer?
Yeah, and Rick, and I love the synergies that you mentioned between what we are doing here and with FarmBeats and FarmStack, right? That is, while we are coming up with new ways to get data to bring it to AI, I think this data sharing framework could unlock a lot of new applications. So at Microsoft, we have been working on various ways, various technologies to enable secure sharing of data. That is, the first part is around data privacy. That is, how do you make sure that data is going to the right place? So one of the things I had talked about in my previous talk was this edge framework, whereas you can think of it like compute sitting closer to the grower. Like, for example, it could be in the farm, in the farmer's house, or on a cell tower, or in the cell network, close to the user, where you can define policies about where that data stream flows. The other thing we are working on is in the cloud, we are working on two technologies. One is what we call is homomorphic encryption, which essentially what it is a way to have encrypted data and run artificial intelligence on encrypted data using this technology, which is called homomorphic encryption. We've actually released a product called, it's a research project. It's an open source with the MIT license called SEAL, which allows people to share data, especially string and numeric data. And you can share the data, but the data is never out in the open. You can perform all the AI, all the training on top of encrypted data. The other project, which is right now in private preview, is called Azure Confidential Compute, which essentially what it does is it allows, again, processing of data while it is encrypted. So, right now, a lot of people when they talk about encryption, they talk about how the data, when it is stored, is encrypted. When it is being transferred, say from India to the US, that data will be encrypted. But when it is being processed, when someone's trying to process that data, you have to decrypt the data and then do actions on it. When you decrypted the data, like for example, you asked a query about, hey, tell me the farmer's name and farmer's name, phone number, and do some operation on it. You can only do it after decrypting the data, at which point the data is in the open for certain periods of time. With this product, which we're building called Azure Confidential Compute, the data is always encrypted. The part where it is getting decrypted is all happening in this hardware encryption, which is using Intel's SGX platform, at which point the data is never really available to anyone else to hack into. So using that, different organizations can then share data with each other without the risk of anyone actually accessing the data that they are not supposed to access. So this is, again, one of the other projects that we are working on. Essentially, we are working on different tools, different products that can enable people to share data in a secure way without hurting the privacy of the different entities who own that data.
Super cool. Maybe I'll also ask Lynn, given like your experience in like lots of different sectors, not just in agriculture, one of the things that I've heard Stuart Collis from the Gates Foundation, who will be speaking in just a little bit, say is that in some of the conferences he's gone to, like in the agri-tech space in the U.S., farmers and the ag industry types of folks often say that we wish we had an industry standard earlier because like now we're trying to, but it's all like sort of a little bit convoluted because like there's a lot of things that already exist. I guess based on your experience in like lots of different spaces, how do you think about the evolution of any industry standard for data sharing in any sector, and how would you think about it from at what stage of evolution is the sector and its maturity to begin that conversation?
Yeah, I think, thank you, Rick. And I think the metadata, so that's data about data, right, becomes our quote, way out of the problem, because there already, as you say, exist many standards. And this is across agriculture. As I think many of you know, there are some prominent, agriculture products companies that have done a very good job of creating, let's say, data set repositories for their own advancement, and their advancement helps their customers. Let's be clear. However, the research community frequently does not have access to that data. And then the data that is available to the research community is frequently, as you say, convoluted, fragmented, many different protocols, many different storage standards, many different approaches to signaling the quality and source of data. So the way out is to derive a metadata layered approach that allows us to answer questions about a data set on many dimensions. Where did this come from? How was it supplied? What protocols it stored in? How did you get software to basically read this data for you, or to temporarily decrypt the data? How do I take advantage of something like Azure Confidential Compute or the peer-to-peer connectors and the data transfer of FarmStack? It's the metadata about those things that needs to get standardized. And I believe there is hope for that, because as you say, and in the industrial internet, there are many protocols and many approaches to sharing time series data. And I think it's also important to realize some use of data sets needs to be real time. People need to be looking at the data as it is generated. We're talking about, weather conditions or events that might be of great interest to the users of that data. And those events need to be, assessed and responded to while they're happening. And so the metadata that I'm describing needs to also enable data transfers of data that is being generated live. Basically, similar. I mean, think of the way you consume media, like Netflix or iTunes. And I don't mean to, push anybody's trademark or anything like that. But you can consume a live sports event the same way you can consume, a movie that's been stored in 100 different places around the globe for your consumption. So the key here is, how do I remove all of the plumbing and technology dependent, technical expert dependent consumption of data, and make it possible for people to both supply and use data the same way they do movies or live events or songs, as we do that today. But to make the software that does that available to everybody, not just the people who want to make money off of storing and playing back that content. I guess a question I have back for you also, I don't know if you had a chance to review how the peer-to-peer connectivity of FarmStack addresses privacy and security. I know we had the example from the video, but I'd be curious if you could go in a little more detail, Ricken, about how FarmStack addresses the privacy and security issue.
Yeah, so with FarmStack, we're developing it as an open source standard, and one that we intend to co-develop with organizations who are interested, including HPE and Microsoft, and others, including Fraunhofer University and others, and would invite others to participate. And with FarmStack, the way that peer-to-peer functionality that I shared takes place is that basically there are these data connectors that are defined and that include various requirements to that data being shared. So if it is a requirement of, say, anonymization for that data to be shared, if it has some privacy related attributes of, let's say, individually attributable information about farmers, that it's going from one party to another, that needs to not be exposed without some kind of consent mechanism, that anonymization step as well as that consent step are both codified within the data connector between the data provider and then are the limitations that that data then has for the data consumer. And that's something that we've really put as a core element to what we're trying to develop in FarmStack. And just like what Ranveer mentioned about confidential compute, for certain types of data, perhaps there is some types of data that require even stricter levels of encryption. And in that case, that data could be passed to something like confidential compute on Azure. In other cases, perhaps that level of hardware level encryption is not required, but maybe some anonymization is. And that, again, is something that is defined within the usage policies of these data connectors. Ranveer, do you want to share any additional thoughts about how you think, in terms of the evolution of the sector in both the global north and south, given your experience with so many stakeholders in the space, where the state of agriculture data sharing is in both kind of contexts, and at what stage do you think even having this conversation about having a standard makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good point, Rick, in that I think the data is so fragmented right now that there's a lot of agricultural data, right? Everyone we talk to talks about how much data there is. I've even talked, I know Brian's asking questions here, Brian King, and he's talked about how rich data sets we have. But the problem is the data set exists, as we mentioned before, in silos. Every organization has a lot of data, but only about a part of the entire ecosystem. And like, for example, equipment companies, even thinking of the private sector, there is every organization has a lot of data. If you look at the equipment companies, the seed companies, the chemical companies, they have rich amounts of data, both from the farm as well as from the products that are used in the farm. And this data is not really shared outside of what they have. It's just they have that data and they try to make inferences of the data that they have and any public data sources. And every organization is trying to do that. And the private sector, what we found is they have rich amounts of data. Same with public sector, but public sector, the data is not usually with most of the organizations that we work with, the data is not in a state where you can, it's all, even within the organization, it's sitting in silos. So one of the things when we think about how do we enable sharing of this data, we have to look at both approaches. One, enabling each organization to help them make use of the data that they have, number one. But second, to be able to share it across the other, with the other organizations. And the other point that you raised, Rikin, about privacy levels, that it's not just about sharing or not sharing, but sharing to what extent, right? Who are you allowed to share with? What different data streams are you allowed to share with? What's the stringency of the data? Do you need audit after that? Do you need to be able to say who accessed your data in a way that the data doesn't escape? And these are all different levels of privacy that you need, and security levels that you need to address as part of this system. Like the FarmStack system that you're building could address all of these ecosystem. Of course, building the entire system is going to be difficult in one go, but I think we could take steps towards that holy grail where all the data can be shared with the people who need access to that data. Right? The other thing I also wanted to point out was around regulations. That is, when we think of, especially when you think of artificial intelligence and sharing of data, that is the data, the same data that can be used to say unlock your phone with face recognition can be used in wrong ways to hurt the people from whom the data was collected. And so we need either one is, of course, we need the right policies, the right regulations, which becomes interesting given the global nature of the data. And that is, how do you enforce local sovereign policies within each country while still allowing sharing of some of the data at a global scale? But we need regulations, we need the right technologies, and we need the right standards, the thing you and Lynn mentioned as well, in order to share this data to unlock all of this new value. So, Rikin, I wanted to now throw it back to you about all the different things you're doing. And in the context of COVID, for example, right now, the current situation we are facing, how could this data sharing framework, the one you're building with FarmStack, how could it help make the situation better? How could it help address some of the problems the agricultural community is facing these days with COVID?
Cool. Thanks, Ranveer. And I'll also just kind of conclude our section to kind of pass over to Stuart and Laura and Parmesh to kind of lead us in the discussion and Q&A kind of section. But yeah, in this moment of COVID, all of us have had to shift often our programming and how we engage with farmers and markets and the like to engage with these farming communities and the food and agricultural system more generally in a highly digitized fashion. If anything, it's kind of accelerated the transition that was kind of already in motion. And farmers themselves are increasingly connected. In the first 4 months of the pandemic, there was a 4x increase of usage of YouTube and WhatsApp amongst rural communities in India. Now, internet usage in rural India exceeds urban usage, right? So there's huge change taking place. And this just means that there's also the risk of more fragmentation of many more services and many more data silos being created. And where opportunities of the FarmStack work, as well as what Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise are doing, can really come together in a complementary fashion to create value at an organizational level, as well as at a farmer level. Because one organization is not going to be able to do this alone. And we have to come together as a community to create a shared infrastructure that we all believe can actually create win-wins for our own respective missions and services. So with that, I'll hand over to Parmesh to take us into the discussion section.
Thanks a lot, Rikin. And this was a fascinating discussion. And I think that's the way we thought that most issues got raised. And you can see from the questions which people are asking in the chat, there's a very vibrant kind of discussion going on the other side. And we would like that to be also brought in back to you guys again to respond to some of the issues people are raising. So I would like now to shift focus to Stuart and Laura to give their reflections on both the issues which were raised, and if they won't raise any new issues there. The hard line is that we have to end this session at 10:45. So I would request both of you to be as brief as possible. You have 10 to 12 minutes for this segment, and then I would harvest the key questions which have already come. I would urge Ranveer, Riken, and Len to really look at the questions already which are there, because you know what I'm going to be asking you, so that you can respond to some of those questions. I already have some questions from my side also, which I would also like to raise there. Okay, over to you, Stuart, for your reflections.
Yep, sure thing. Ranveer, can you hear me okay? Amish?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great, thank you. All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for a great session. Really pleased to see this come to the fore as a topic for discussion, and really fantastic overview and inputs this morning. Maybe I'll start with just a brief overview of some of the work we're doing at the Foundation and how we're thinking about ag data ecosystems in a series of workshops we've been running, and then I'll finish with just one question, Pamesh, to keep it brief, and you can fold it into your other questions, and then I'll hand it to Laura for her reflections. I think this is such an important topic. We've identified this, and the term we're using is ag data ecosystems. Is an area that a colleague of mine, Tuvan Nguyen, who is not available today, is covering. But it's certainly something that's really important to our entire digital agriculture strategy. If we think about ag transformation at the national level, people often focus on the applications and tools and sort of forget about that entire infrastructure and policies, enabling environment, and data and content required to drive digital agriculture. So great to see it as a topic here today, and trying to figure out how to practically solve for it. We recently ran a series of workshops which the team here on the call were involved in around ag data for decision makers with our colleagues at USAID, and the idea was to dive into some of these same issues: data demands, gaps, thinking about what the sort of future state of a healthy ag data ecosystem might look like, and more especially, how do we collaborate between donors, NGOs, government, public sector, civil sector, and private sector, especially in low-income countries, to benefit small-scale producers and the poor. So we explored, open data, data spectrums, thinking about data as a club good, data that means, data that's excludable but non-rivalrous. Is that a way that we can enable these types of data exchange to occur? And the work that Riken was describing on these peer-to-peer systems, I think, is a great evolution of that thinking. A lot of people have in the past made the analogy of, data as then people think about, well, is data more like air? Is it something that's just available to everybody? And then there is a more recent analogy of data as water. The apps and tools are the faucets and the taps. The infrastructure we're talking about today are the pipes. How do we actually flow data? And I think just that general principle of more data fluidity across the ag sector really enables greater opportunities for the value of that data to be realized. And that's really important because this allows cost of data collection, data sharing, all the infrastructure we're talking about to be covered. So even though an individual farmer collecting data at their field that they can actually see across their 1 hectare may not be of high value to them at that particular point in time, it may be of value to them if it's sort of shared up to improving an insurance product that they can receive a better insurance rate. So thinking about these types of use cases, as Riken and the team were describing, I think is critical. Some of the readouts from that working sessions were around exactly the topics we're talking about, donors funding, certain aspects of policy data standards, etc., private sector funding or co-funding, co-developing pilots and new ideas, new projects. And then getting into, why is it important for people to share data? And two things that came out of that were, people felt that it was useful to share data as long as it was useful to my organization and the broader sector. But there was also a fear of, the cost of, or the negative consequences of sharing data potentially. So data breaches and some of the issues that Ricken and Ranvi have been talking about data security, I think are really important. So I'll stop there and just ask my one question, which is around, how do we move this forward within the industry? Ricken made the comment about my observations of the ag tech industry in the US, and how do we avoid that? What's the type of entity we think would be required? Is this the role of a digital green? Is it a consortium approach? I liked Ricken's thoughts around governing groups that are regional. So I'd love to hear the team's thoughts on that, and I'll stop there and hand it to Laura. Thank you.
Laura, over to you.
Thanks very much, Parmesh, Stuart, and our speakers and presenters. I've had a fair today, and interesting ideas that have been put out there. I think I might focus more on the questions. Some of the things that I was thinking about earlier have been echoed by the other presenters so far. So I think it's very clear that data access and data sharing has so much social value to generate, and that's something we obviously care strongly about from the World Bank side. And so figuring out ways to enable that is very important, but then there's a sort of competing force of recognizing what are the frameworks that we can work within related to existing regulation, constraints in different places, as well as the technical solutions out there. And I think we've had sort of an interesting oversight of some new technical solutions to support this. I think my questions, I have 5 questions. For the FarmStack model specifically, you mentioned a sort of end use or a use case example where you focused on an innovator that would be able to create a new product with 2 pieces of data. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about other users that you would see who could benefit from the FarmStack model. For example, would it serve the public sector? Would it serve farmers themselves? Or is it more for this catalyzing startup and this recognition that there's certainly space to deepen in the ag tech sector? Another question was more FarmStack would function in practice. The peer-to-peer connections seem like a very viable solution, but how would you facilitate those data matches, so to speak, happen? How would somebody that wanted to get access to some sort of data or had some other sort of data to offer happen in practice? So I was sort of interested, should we think of this as like a Tencent, an Alibaba, an Amazon, some kind of data marketplace where you can search for things and you can see what the different offerings are? Or is there some other kind of model that you're thinking of to allow these data matches to happen? Another consideration, and I think this is just very much like an evolving policy space, but peer-to-peer data sharing, like, are there anti-competitive considerations that we need to be careful of there? Is that something that that you've thought much about? For example, in different regions, it's not necessarily possible for two commercial companies to share commercially sensitive information with each other. So would there be only certain types of data that would be shareable, and how would one navigate that? A similar question to Stuart, really, and I think this is sort of a very important question, is what is the consideration of who to drive this forward? Has there been some consideration towards, would we think of one platform per country, or platforms that share across borders, share data across borders? Some considerations there. And then I think, you touched on this briefly, but as a takeaway and things that we would like to think the bank, are there, certain prerequisites that international organizations like the bank can support in moving this this innovative idea forward? So I'll leave it there, because I do think we're going to have some great questions from the audience too. But those are some of the questions that came to my mind from hearing the discussion today. Thanks again for a great presentation.
Thanks a lot, Laura and Stuart, both for raising some very, very useful questions. And along with the questions we have got, I think we have a rich array of things which we have. So clearly, people are asking about privacy, security in a shared ecosystem. How are these things going to be influenced, and how are these going to be enforced and implemented? And is there a technical fix to that? And I think Ranveer alluded to some of the things they are trying to talk in terms of a safe, encrypted kind of solutions and all. So people are asking, how will we take care of privacy and security in a shared standard format? So I would like sort of all the panelists to talk a little bit about it. I'll complete a set of 3 questions first, and then I'll raise another cluster of questions there. The second one is where people ask about how do we create data management capacity and competency, in the users, basically. So I think that's a very, very important point, is that's not only about just building a standard and then, because overall, the people who are using it need to create competency and capacity to do that. Is there a way of doing it? Is there lessons from other developer community work we have done in other sectors in the tech space where we can learn from? The third set of questions are the proverbial questions about blockchain. Blockchain was supposed to do interoperability and build trust. I want to get the view of the panelists on, is the blockchain going to be important in this case, since we are talking about creating trust and interoperability, that those sets of solutions, when you are developing your own platforms, how have you looked at blockchain in that respect? So I would ask you to give a brief response each on these 3 sets of questions, and then I'll come to other set of questions there. Over to you, Rikin, Ranveer, and Liam. Yeah.
So before, because I'm not going to be as eloquent, I think, as Ranveer and Rikin on some of these responses, that what I want to say to preface the response to many of these questions is, let's all keep in mind that technology exists to enable people to do things. And when we use our smartphones to call another person, we don't think about all of the artifacts of what goes into enabling that conversation. Our focus is on that conversation with that other person. And so when we talk about GDPR, when we talk about, how should this be centralized, decentralized, I think it's easy to get lost in technology artifacts. The most critical requirement that we have is to enable people to share information with other people, for people in their roles on behalf of a commercial entity to create value for that entity. It's about people at all ends of the equation. And I think what GDPR, and the reason why I do think it will evolve, is because GDPR today has been focused more on the opaque issues of just protecting people from commercial entities, but it has not yet expanded its horizons to, and this is what we need with this standard, it has not expanded its horizons to allow people to designate other people whom they trust and to protect themselves from the people that those people know. I don't know if that makes sense. In a networking sense, the evolution of privacy, and I think what these standards need to address for data is, I might trust, Mia, my wife, but I don't necessarily trust everybody who she trusts. how do I protect and enable people to share and trust other people, and at the same time not concede all of their trust to those people they trust know. I don't know if that makes sense. But again, let's reduce this down to people. When I think about the efficacy of these data standards, and I'm not a farmer, but I'm just a person who pays an electric bill. If someone could tell me in real time, did you know that you guys use your refrigerator and burn up a lot more energy with how you use your refrigerator than others like you? I'm sure the same sort of information in a very localized way could be provided in a context specific way to farmers, to others who generate data through their activities. So the key is I want to enable people to open up to other people, but to be protected from those they don't know until such time as they have access to information about those people. I do want to take advantage of sharing my data with those who can help me, but I think of it as people and, interacting with other people. If we think of it that way, I think a lot of the technology artifacts that are missing start to come into play. And we know we've made it when we're not talking about the technology anymore. So I'll stop there because I know there's a lot of interesting questions for Rick and Ranveer to address.
Hi, Rikin, can you come in, and Ranveer?
Sure. Yeah, I can go, and then feel free to chime in. I think a couple of responses on the privacy kind of bit. I would say that the tech, just as Lynn was saying, does need to kind of go with the people and the actual relationships and the actual ways that they trust or don't trust each other. Tech is not going to totally solve it, like that problem if the people are kind of working around one another, right, in an anti-competitive manner. However, if you can couple people together with legal kind of governance mechanisms and tech, that's like the nice kind of triumvirate of saying that these legal policies of, say, GDPR or whatever other sort of data sharing standards that somebody might, a data provider might have with a data consumer, can be codified to make sure that what I've put in my governance document is going to be held. That provides an additional layer of confidence and trust to kind of enable this ecosystem to develop. With respect to the question about like data management competency, I think it's a really good one. And there's two levels to it. There's one at the systems level of like organizations like ministries of agriculture or others, as well as individual farmers. And that is something that does need to be invested in terms of developing internal kind of capacity. But the capacity will also develop when there is value creation, right? Use cases that actually enable the systems level and farmer level actors to actually see value from their data coming together. So like, for instance, for Laura's point, I think until or unless the farmers are able to get like access to a unified view to their own data and to make like better decisions against it, then they're always going to be somewhat more somewhat sort of a second party to their own data. Of course, that's different in different markets. So like Ranveer can share about how data in amongst farmers in the US that FarmBeats work with, those farmers get it and they're using the data to make planning decisions. So that's what we have to prove, and not just operate at a systems level, but actually enable the end users really to build their capacity and see ultimate value. And then with something like blockchain, obviously there's a lot of discussion about it, but for a lot of things it can be overkill. You don't need to restrict yourself. It's neither like exclusionary away from blockchain or saying that we necessarily need to work with blockchain, but by creating an open standard that allows you to work with varying types of cloud services and local hosting options, proprietary data, non-proprietary data, centralized data, decentralized data, including blockchain. That's what a standard needs to be able to enable, to work cross-functionally across different types of systems that organizations may leverage. And that's certainly been the ethos of maintaining a pretty thin layer of the FarmStack architecture that can work across different types of data types. I'll hand over to Ranveer to chime in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rikin and Lynn, for sharing your thoughts, and also Stuart, Laura, and Parmesh for the comments. I agree with what Lynn and Rikin said. There is not much to add. The only thing I will add to that is technology-wise, we are building a lot of the components. Like as Rikin mentioned, blockchain is could be one of the enablers, but we want to at the same time make it not too cumbersome, right? And blockchain is good for keeping track of how to, like, for example, things that data is not tampered, which is again one of the properties you want to ensure that while data is being shared, it is not being tampered with. And at the same time, you don't want to make your entire system very heavyweight. But yeah, blockchain is one of the technology enablers for this FarmStack model that Rick and Lynn were talking about.
So I'll now raise a second set of questions now, which I think are emerging. It's like Brian King from the Big Data Platform is saying that, can we define the developer community for addressing this data standard challenge and then bring in a lot of stakeholders in and then try to evolve an architecture out of that. So I think it's something I would like your views on in terms of future. Could we sort of, is this it's like, will this be amenable to really create a kind of data standard challenge? Can we offer a data standard challenge going forward? Or is there another way of doing and making sure that we are moving to the next level of utilization? I like what Ranveer said, that while data is being collected and encrypted, there is analytics being done on that. I like that, because I find that we look for a gold plate standard of getting all the data and doing that, and then we do the analysis, and then we do the product. The cycle of developing products is very kind of long and elongated. Whereas if we could develop a concurrent one where products are all the time being developed through analytics and being done out of existing data, it could be very interesting. So I would like to know that. Also, I'd like to ask this question, that as a public good, we consider that we have invested for a very long in analog infrastructure in agriculture, which is like, creating lots of assets and things like that. I don't think we have invested in the data infrastructure as to that extent. So if we were investing in what we were describing today as a public good, how should we invest? Because we have almost like $4 to $5 billion investment in agriculture. How should we invest differently going forward in the countries we work? And how can we invest parallelly also in this innovation and collaboration platform, which allows us to keep on developing applications there? So I would like some kind of thinking on this, on how we should engage with this in our future investments going forward. And on Laura's point also, which she's raising, is that, as we go forward, industry will develop its own standard. There is some kind of voluntary work which key people from the industry can come together and develop the industry standard. Is there any role for government in this? And what should we be advising our governments if they are investing in this going forward? So that's the set of questions where I would like some of the thoughts on it. It's like, because we are asked for advice on this issue all the time. And we want to draw on you on how we should be able to do that. And the final question is about how should we invest in this going forward? Shreya has just posted a survey question on how we should engage on this. And if you want to stay engaged, so I would like you to, copy that link and respond to that, so that we are collecting some responses there. So back to, again, Ranveer, Rick, and Liam to respond to this. The two questions. One is that what is the way we bring a developer community or the industry into defining what we do next? And second, what is the role of World Bank or governments in this going forward? And you can answer other questions which you heard as well, because we have now 15 minutes. Thank you. First, I would like to start with Ranveer.
Yeah, thanks, Parmesh. And these are hard questions, right? And we've been thinking about this for a while and brainstorming with many of you people in the audience. And so we don't have concrete answers, but some of the thoughts on this. One is how do we get a community started? Once we to start with, we need to start sharing some of the data. We need to start building like what we've done with some of the things here in the US, building that at least the first few scenarios rather than just building the data, the entire shared data. We should start thinking about the scenarios that we light up, maybe even two or three concrete ones, and then make sure all the bottlenecks around it are addressed. The bottlenecks include one, just the data itself, the data sharing framework around it, and the policies that are around it as well. So we need to address all those three and pick a few scenarios that can be lit up, which are lucrative enough for startups to come and start working on, right? Because they are the ones who are going to really take it forward. Work with the public sector organizations, the private sector organizations who might have the data, who might have the technologies to start bringing that in, and bring in the donor organizations as well, and the grantees to build that stack, but also build the people bring together the people who will be building those applications. I think it goes back to something what Lynn mentioned as well, that when, like with the phone, there are different ways in which it could be used, and we should get this data, get people to start building on it with a few concrete, compelling scenarios, maybe that drives what kind of data we collect, how we share that data. I think that would add some more concreteness to thinking, and we can then put milestones around it, saying this is what the next steps are to get to that future, right? And that once we start with a few compelling applications, I think more will just follow. So that is the first part. The other thing you mentioned, you asked, Parmesh, was what does this digital stack look like for data sharing, right? And I think the investments, when you're talking to governments, one of the things you could talk about are, we think of it like a layered stack. At the bottommost layer is data acquisition, being able to get all the data in the first place. The second is around data cleansing, making sure that data is in the right format in a way that it can be ingested in the cloud in a way. The third above it would be data sharing, like FarmStack, what Rikin was talking about. And the fourth thing on top would be the AI, the applications that turn that data from just numbers or strings to something that one can act upon. And if you think of it like a 4-layered stack, that's what you can start enabling. Now, of course, to make that, to take this concept into reality, you would need things like a connectivity infrastructure. You would need data centers. You would need the right AI compute capabilities. You need the right security primitives. You need the right policies. All of that to enable that data stack that I mentioned. But it's really exciting to see the way you all are driving this, right? I think this is the future, and none of us have the answers, right? I think even what I said is formed. This opinion is formed by talking to you, talking to a lot of other people who are on this call, and it's exciting to be working with you to take it towards that future. So
thanks a lot, Ranveer. These are very good thoughts. I think we will really pursue these one. I want to take about 5 to 10 countries and really pursue this concretely with a lot of people who are here.
I would
and
suggest
to move from webinar to that. And so I'd like to come to Liam now and then to Rikin.
Yeah, so I would suggest if we want to throw, we'll call it investment at this problem and create an organic response, probably one of the ways that I believe would be very efficacious is, are we missing capital somewhere and a data source that could be of great value? So, if we didn't have weather stations already, investing in the data collection side. I know it sounds, people will say there's lots of data out there already, but the truth is there's infrastructure to plumb and source data that may be missing in places, and it's a chance to drive the whole stack from bottom to top. If you hit it at a critical missing data source and invest in, let's say, sensors for people to put in their fields because they don't have them today, in some parts of the global south, we'll say. That could enable a government or an investor to drive the whole stack, because you begin at where the data itself is collected. If it's an important enough source of data that people see value from it, then you could use that wedge, the wedge of investment and capital, to turn around and create organic responses where you could stipulate basically the use of things like FarmStack. Once this data now is available, I'm providing sensors, or I'm providing this new, we'll call digital on-ramp for a new data source that's of great value in this community, but you have to follow my rules. Once I put the capital out there, you use this stack. If you're going to consume this data and provide services back to farmers, you need to follow, this structure for how you do it. And then if you need investment, talk to us. And because I think if you start at the back end where the data is being collected, it'll take more time, I believe, to get a reaction out of the organic. I think of it as a marketplace where people with incentives will jump in and try to help solve problems. So the capital intensity of some of this data collection is a great place to look to start.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. A very, very useful point. And I think we are investing in weather stations, automated weather stations, using IoT devices, water projects and all. But what I find is that those data still don't talk to each other, because although we've invested a lot on the data infrastructure, but I don't think we still have, as Ranveer was saying, an architecture to really use some of these cases as scenarios of what utilization would look like. So I think I completely agree there is still a lot of gap in many countries on the data infrastructure. It's a good starting point for us and define what that would look like. But it is utilization, analytics, and use cases also to be worked concurrently so that we have some concrete applications being built in as we are. Rikin, over to you now, since you have very thoughts, and please also talk a little about how you take the FarmStack idea and combine a lot of these ideas, and how will this work going forward?
I would echo everything that Lynn and Ranveer have shared. The metaphor or the analog, right, of what we're trying to do with FarmStack and data is not super dissimilar to like what has happened in totally different spaces. Like we all know Google Maps. We use Google Maps for our own needs of finding point-to-point directions. In addition, that data set becomes something that others like Uber or Lyft end up building their own value-added applications on top of. Without sort of Google Maps and lots of other sort of data sets, those other value-added applications would not exist. And that's what we mean by the stack that Ranveer was describing, building on one layer on top of the other of additional value creation with each subsequent step. I think also with respect to the need is to create these exemplar use cases or scenarios, as Ranveer mentioned, or even what Lynn was saying, wherein you do need to start with some base level of data and some concrete use case that brings together two or more data sets and proves at scale that bringing those two data sets together from two different organizations has created greater value than those two organizations with their own independent data sets operating alone. And that's sort of how we're approaching the development of FarmStack, and what we hope to be able to do, even with partners like HPE and Microsoft, and maybe others of you who are interested and complete the survey and want to join hands with us, which is to create some concrete use cases in geographies like here in India or Africa and the US, and in the back end, be building out this tech architecture for how we can generalize a common platform or standard that enables an interoperability across. Not that there would necessarily be use cases that transcend country boundaries, but can we create a back-end data standard that allows for use cases within countries that, again, provides greater value than the sum of the individual parts? And with regard to like the governance of this, it will probably have to be a multi-stakeholder group that is comprised of both global as well as national leaders of both government and also private sector, civil society, and tech organizations to come together to identifying what are those key data sets or use cases and usage policies and analytics that you want to build to create those exemplar use cases. And with regard to where we are with FarmStack, we're supported by the Gates Foundation and DFID of the UK government to be building out a number of use cases in Ethiopia. And we also have support from the Walmart Foundation in India to do the same here. And we're essentially trying to create some of these exemplar use cases with several of you who are on the call and would be still open to actually partner with others who are interested to bring together data sets that either exist or in some cases need to be created to prove impact at scale, and then in the back end be developing this architecture. And the way that we see some of these pieces coming together is FarmStack we focused on this data transfer element of secure data sharing, codifying usage policies. But there's lots of other pieces to this like data sharing puzzle. There's the data discovery and usage tracking. There's the data transformation and business intelligence aspects. And that's where Hewlett Packard Enterprise and Microsoft, we see complementary roles, and perhaps others of you on today's call as well, because we don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all type of set of tools for every single use case in every single scenario. Some may need more sophisticated AI analytics and may be able to use some automated data pipelines of the type that Lynn was describing, where data can just be pulled automatically without having somebody to search on a marketplace and manually connect the dots. In other cases, maybe you do have to connect the dots with manual marketplace discovery services. But I would say that that's where we are, and we again don't see ourselves as the one organization that can solve the magnitude of this challenge in front of us. And we'd be excited to partner with those who are interested.
Thank you very much, Rick, and really much appreciated the thoughts that you have brought it together. Very difficult to summarize, but I will try to sort of say that Shreya has just shared a kind of, we are trying to create a kind of make sure that we follow up with you on whoever is interested in collaborating and following up. And we will also send this after the thing is over with the recording and the presentations and with this survey again, because we would like to create a community and to build on what was discussed in this webinar. So, and Shreya has also posted this in the chat box as well. So please feel free to join in the platform and so that you stay connected with that. So just to sum up very quickly, I think we discussed the possibilities. We discussed the architecture. We also discussed how we would go about doing it. And Ranvi rightly said that we don't know how this is going to happen, but we can start doing things, start sharing and developing the existing use cases already. I think Lynn clearly talked about what the digital infrastructure investments are required. If we can develop the digital stack investments which need to go in and define it, then I am very interested that in every investment we do on agriculture in the bank, we build this investment in this digital and data stack very centrally into our investments, which means we also need to convince the governments that this is as important as the analog investment. And we will definitely organize a session with a lot of decision makers eventually, where we develop a kind of a case for how to invest and what to invest in there. And what Rikin was talking about is that if we can start developing this backend data kind of the things we need to invest in and pick up certain countries where we can invest in. I would also still like to understand what we should do globally. And I'm looking forward to Stuart, who is really taking the lead on this from the Gates Foundation side, to help us think through on what we should invest in globally in terms of knowledge, learning, convening as we go forward. It's a multi-stakeholder thing. I don't think it can be done by the bank. We need a multi-stakeholder platform to do that as we go forward. So a very rich discussion today. I'd like to thank all the panelists first, Riken, Ranveer, and Len, for really sharing very in an open way what was being discussed today. Also Stuart and Laura for really raising very set of questions. And finally, to all of you who participated very actively. I would also like to record my deep appreciation for Shreya and Vivek from Digital Green, and Vivek from Bank, who did a lot of background work in making this today happen. And also Vineet for really answering a number of questions while the chat is going on from Digital Green. So we promised that we will share the recording, because in this case, presentation is less important and recording is more important. This is one of those webinars where the discussion is so rich that we had so many ideas which came in. We will also share the curated chat, because there is a lot of things which were happening outside the webinar, which is as rich as possible. The next one we are doing on Thursday is on Kyrgyzstan, and Artuvad, who leads our investment in Central Asia, is going to make a presentation on some of the very interesting proof of concept we are developing in area of dairy farmers and milk and other areas. So he will share what the bank is doing along with a number of other stakeholders there. It's next Thursday at the same time. Thank you very much, and have a good evening, good morning, and good night wherever you are. And thanks a lot again. Bye-bye.